This is The Link, connecting people to Canada and Canada to the world, from Radio Canada International and CBC Radio 1. Hello, I'm Mark Montgomery. Welcome to our program. Starting us off today, how much longer will Somali-born Canadian Bashir Makhtal remain behind bars in Ethiopia?
The Canadian government has a lot of leverage to the tune of $100 million in annual aid to Ethiopia. So we think that it is time that it used those options.
And in a moment, we'll hear about the efforts in Canada to free Bashir Makhtal, who's serving a life sentence in a prison in Ethiopia for rebel activity. Then my colleague Raymond Desmarteaux comes into studio to introduce us to another French-Canadian recording artist. And later, they say that breaking up is hard to do, but it's even worse when you have children and now have to agree on how to parent them. Our lifestyle columnist Geeta Nadkarni offers some tips on making the transition easier on everyone. And soaring food prices were one of the tipping points in the civil unrest in several African countries.
Some people say that it's going to be worse than the 2008 food crisis, that prices have already moved up dramatically since 2007.
And we'll be looking at some of the elements that are creating fears of another food bubble. And briefly in hour two, a scientific study says the Arctic water is the warmest it's been in 2,000 years and that it's not due to natural causes. Those are stories coming up on today's edition of The Link. 4 years ago, Canadian Bashir Makhtal left Toronto for his country of origin, Somalia, to set up a new business venture in the nearby tiny country of Djibouti. Little did he know that while fleeing the threat of civil unrest in Somalia, he would be arrested and thrown in jail. He's now serving a life sentence in a prison in Addis Ababa for terrorist activity, a charge that both the Canadian government and his supporters deny. And with details on this story, our reporter Valerie Morin joins us from the national capital, Ottawa. Hello, Valerie.
Hello, Mark.
So why is Bashir Makhtal still behind bars after 4 years?
Well, Mark, according to his lawyer, it's clear the Ethiopian government feels strong about this case. Bashir Makhtal was arrested back in January of 2007 while on his way to Nairobi. He was fleeing the looming threat of civil unrest in Somalia. The religious government in Somalia had just been overthrown following the invasion of the country by Ethiopia, and Bashir Makhtal was arrested and held for a few weeks before being put on a secret flight to Ethiopia. The government of Ethiopia accuses Bashir Makhtal of rebel activity, but his relatives say his only crime is that his grandfather was a founder of the Ogadeni National Liberation Front, an organization outlawed in Ethiopia. Bashir Makhtal was born in this oil-rich region, the region of Ogadeni. People there in the area have been battling for their independence. In fact, the Ogadeni region was at the core of the war between Somalia and Ethiopia back in the late 70s.
Well, I can just imagine prison conditions there are not what one would consider ideal. So how is Bashir Makhtal doing health-wise?
Well, according to his wife, not so well, Mark. Asizo Osman Abdi says he has lost a lot of weight, has bronchitis and back problems.
sidaa darteed maadaama uu xanuunsanayo waxaan dowladda Ethiopia warsanaya madaxweynaheeda inuu cafis u fidiyo.
Bashir's health is failing, and due to that there's a humanitarian concern, and I am requesting that the Prime Minister of Ethiopia pardon Bashir Makhtal.
And Bashir Makhtal is defended by high-profile lawyer Lorne Waldman. He's the man who successfully defended Maria Arar, the Canadian who was wrongfully jailed and tortured in a Syrian prison.
We appreciate the fact that a very senior minister of our government, John Baird, went to Ethiopia and made representations on Bashir's behalf. But that was in March. We had high expectations in June when the G20, when the Prime Minister of Ethiopia came, that the case would be raised, but it wasn't raised. We're now in January of 2011, 4 years, and it's time that our government got serious about this matter.
As Mr. Waldman pointed out, last winter, the government House leader, John Baird, traveled to Ethiopia to try to negotiate the release of Bashir Makhtal, but as you can well see, he was unsuccessful, and since then, there has been little movement on behalf of the Canadian government to free him.
So what course of action is being proposed to free him then?
Well, the foreign affairs critic for the New Democratic Party, Paul Doer, says it's time to move beyond diplomacy.
It's time that Ethiopia understands that Bashir's case is not just an irritant in its relationship with Canada. Canadians take the freedom of our fellow citizens seriously, and we will expect consequences for the unacceptable delay in the resolution of his case.
And this sentiment is echoed by the president of Amnesty International in Canada, Alex Neve.
He must now take ownership of this file. He needs to get on the phone with Ethiopian Prime Minister Meles Zenawi. He needs to write to Ethiopian Prime Minister Meles Zenawi. He needs to appoint a high-level envoy, his own personal envoy, who will be charged with responsibility for resolving this file and ensuring that Bashir Makhtal is able to return to Canada.
And Mr. Neve would like for Canada's Prime Minister Stephen Harper to get personally involved in this case. And speaking on behalf of the Canadian government, Conservative MP John Baird said Ottawa is very committed to getting Bashir Makhtal out of prison, but failed to elaborate as to how the Canadian government intends to accomplish that.
What kind of waves is this case making within the Somali-Canadian community?
Quite a bit, Mark. Ahmed Hussein is the president of the Somali-Canadian Congress.
I've traveled all over the country on different matters for the organization and the community, but the one case that's constant in Alberta, in Ontario, Manitoba, everywhere where Canadian Somalis live, is the outrage that the community has been expressing regarding the Bashir Makhtal case. This is a case that every year we think will be the year that he'll get released, but our expectations get disappointed all the time.
And he too agrees that Canada must use the threat of pulling out its foreign aid from Ethiopia to force the release of Bashir Makhtal.
We urge the Canadian government that the time for diplomacy has finished, that Canada has leverage over Ethiopia, that we can use that leverage to demand the rights of Bashir Makhtal to be respected and for Bashir Makhtal to be released immediately. And last but not least, we are dumbfounded as a community on how someone with a Canadian passport who didn't physically go to Ethiopia but was in fact illegally rendered there, how that person can continue to remain in jail.
And Mark, Canada gives Ethiopia $146 million in annual aid. A third of that money is for humanitarian aid, but the bulk of it goes to support governance efforts and to help with the judicial system. It's that money, Bashir Makhtal supporters say, should be used to negotiate his release. While he remains behind bars, the Canadian government has recently granted landing rights at Toronto Pearson International Airport to Ethiopia Airlines, and Bashir Makhtal supporters say the Ethiopian government is simply using this case to get economic gains from Canada.
Thank you very much for this, Valerie.
You're welcome.
And that is our reporter in the national capital, Valerie Moore.